food plays a very important social and cultural role. It's intrinsically central to what it means to be a human being in the social and the cultural sense. It's not just something that you do with calories every day. Food is the way in which people participate in society. Weddings, funerals, all of these important social and cultural events for people are marked with food. So when you deprive people of their ability to access food, you're not just doing mental and physiological damage, you're doing enormous social damage. You're in fact depriving people from being persons in full because of their inability to participate in these food rituals.
I would venture an argument that yes, what's important about food and culture and identity and preference will remain, but it really is under siege. And that siege is this homogenization of this food system that is largely Western, but largely rather around these sort of highly processed foods.
South Africa is emerging as an epicenter of hunger.
The threat of hunger and starvation has become a real issue for South Africa because of the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
COVID-19 exposed the levels of inequality. It exposed the levels of hunger in our society that we often do not see. And this was most clearly seen in the long queues of people waiting for food aid at the beginning of the lockdown period.
I'm telling you, the meal was finished. Am I joking or what?
We have this huge social burden from malnutrition and food insecurity, which is largely, until coronavirus, has largely been invisible. People had this kind of vague idea that there was some kind of child malnutrition problem. But the average privileged South African has got no idea of the extent of that problem. The average South African has got no idea that somewhere between 5,000 and 7,500 children under the age of 5 die as a direct result of starvation in this country every single year.
So since apartheid has ended and the democratic transition, we've had some excellent policies that have emerged. Policies in terms of documents that are trying to analyze elements of the problems of the system. But despite that, and over the 25 years, you've seen things like stunting, so this physiological impact on children, remaining at almost a quarter, at 27% of all children, which is such an indictment on a country as wealthy as ours.
So we see the evidence in our health statistics, we see it in our economic statistics, we see it in our socio-economic and developmental outcomes. And what it shows us is that there is a very big problem with undernutrition in South Africa today.
Despite the fact that South Africa is a middle-income country and we generally self-sufficient in domestic food production, unless we have a very bad drought year, we actually have incredibly poor food security outcomes. We're also one of the few countries in the world that has a constitutionally guaranteed right to food. In fact, there are 2 constitutionally guaranteed rights to food, because Section 27 guarantees everyone the right to food, and Section 28 further guarantees children the right to food.
I mean, our Constitution has the right to food written into it. That's what it says. If you don't have enough resources to get enough food for yourself today, you have a right to food. So who must meet that right now? Okay, the government's abandoned its responsibility there. The corporates aren't interested in that. You have some welfare relief type agencies, but they can't meet that need. So we've got a big problem here.
Often the food system is working now is that you are looking at large scale production of food. So it's not only conventional agriculture in terms of sort of the heavy inputs of fertilizers, of pesticides, of particular kinds of seeds, but it's also almost the industrial scale of it.
I mean, big agriculture is practicing methodologies, farming methods that are destroying the soil, wasting water, occupying land in a kind of a monocultural way, which is highly problematic ecologically. I mean, if you just think of like pest resistance and that kind of thing over time, very, very low biodiversity in your zones of production, and we're suffering serious biodiversity loss.
It's because we are so locked into a formal system of large farms, agribusinesses, that are then supplying those formal value chains and in fact provisioning the bulk of fresh produce, for example, for South Africans. And that makes us very vulnerable. Few players and in a few sort of flows of food. There's an impact on that. It's going to leave millions of people vulnerable. And there are approaches such as agroecology, which is about agriculture with ecology, working with nature rather than exploiting nature.
So people do talk about decolonizing the food system and how you can not only bring back agency, that people can produce food themselves and figure out the distribution and all of that themselves, but also to revive the diversity of traditions, the diversity of products, things that people were planting,
Agroecology is also more climate resistant, and we have to prepare ourselves for more climate crises in the future. And because agroecology's output is more nutritious, it provides a greater boost to our immune system, which we require at a time of a pandemic.
So the way in which food markets operate is critical to who gets to eat and who doesn't get to eat. But it's not farmers that determine what the price of food is. We have a well-established and in quotation marks modern food system, which means it's an urbanized and industrial food system, and it's dominated by the retail sector. So this is very much the kind of food system that you'll find in places like Europe and the United States. You have a couple of large supermarkets that dominate the supply chains for food. They have all the power in the system. If you're a farmer and you want to sell something to a consumer, chances are you have to sell to a processor or you have to sell directly to a retailer. So they have an enormous amount of power over the price that they charge you and the costs that they can force you to carry. The current price that farmers get for milk is around 5 Rand a litre. The smaller a farmer you are, the less you get per litre. Consumers are paying an average of between 12 and 15 Rand a litre for milk. I mean, who are the winners and the losers in that situation? Well, once again, it's fairly obvious. Dairy processors, Clover and Parmalat, are making money. The retailers are making money. Pick and Pay is big in the bottled milk business. And on the other hand, we've got people in the agricultural sector who've lost their jobs and gone out of business, and consumers that can't afford to buy milk.
So if farm prices are pushed down, then farm workers' wages will also be pushed down. And we know that farm workers are amongst the most vulnerable in South Africa, and they are amongst the most lowest paid workers in our country.
And the problem is that these are the wrong winners and losers. We need people in rural areas to be winners from the food system. We need consumers to be able to afford more food. So clearly the system is not delivering the outcomes that we require.
So if your whole food system is designed through the market as your only delivery mechanism, and half of the population aren't being met by that delivery mechanism, you've got a major problem in your society. You have to deal with that.
What we have chosen as the system to decide who eats and who doesn't eat in this country is one that is driven entirely by corporate profit.
The corporates will also suffer if the consumers do not trust them. And that is why we require honesty, transparency, and accountability from the corporate sector if the consumers is to trust them in the future.
If you really want to talk about the right to food, you have to place the effective access of food at the center of the food system as opposed to profit, which is the way it's going now. So we have to have a rethink of our economic systems in order to actually respond to this thing adequately.
We're